Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, the proposer of the motion has suddenly been taken into hospital, the person being P.A. McLaughlin, who has framed this motion. I shall read it to you. Conference welcomes the Westminster Bill making civil marriage available to all citizens, regardless of sexual orientation, and calls for this reform to be extended to Northern Ireland. Conference also welcomes the removal of the ban forbidding willing churches from solemnising gay weddings in their buildings. Conference also welcomes official assurances guaranteeing that no church or clergyman who does not wish to do so will be under any pressure to solemnise such ceremonies on their premises. I commend the motion for your attention.
Motion number 37, please. Motion 37.
Thank you, Conference. I'm pleased to bring this amendment to you at the start of this equality session this afternoon. At the outset, I think it's important to reflect on the context which has led to this debate, and which has arisen not so much as a result of internal pressure, but in part at least from those who try and put pressure on the SDLP and attempt to steal our rights and heritage. Conference, they will not succeed. It is also important to stress that this amendment has been put in the name of the SDLP executive. If there is one thing in this party's DNA, it is the concept of rights, which is why this amendment applauds our rights-based tradition. It's also why, in 1992, 20 years ago, you as a conference called for, in the context of gay rights, equal rights for all. And it's why today this amendment is taking a rights-based approach to this issue and asking for your support for equal rights to be extended to include civil marriage. We've heard PA referred to, and we're aware he's at the moment, we wish him well. I talked to PA, who helped write the Finnegan motion, and he's indicated to me that he is in fact happy to withdraw that motion in favour of this executive-backed amendment. He acknowledges the fact that much debate has taken place around it in the party, and that such an amendment coming from the executive brings with it added strength. Most in this hall will agree with the concept of separation of church and state. Indeed, two of the motions that in your card acknowledge that and call for future legislation to protect that concept and the need to cover freedom of speech issues where they too arise. However, those who would oppose this issue believe they already have sufficient support in law, both in terms of equality legislation and European human rights legislation. Those motions refer to the church as authorities or institutions, but this amendment specifically refers to church membership. After all, a church is not a church without its members, and very often that includes you. That's why I think this amendment goes further. It's saying that this conference respects the right of individuals and church members to hold a different view and determine their own definition of marriage. All sides in this debate hold their conviction for deep-seated and varied reasons. What this conference will be saying is that it respects both sides of the argument, but from a rights perspective, believes that equal rights should extend to civil marriage. Tilting the amendment in that direction has not been done in a vacuum. It has been done taking account of the debate within the Policy Committee, the Executive, assessment on ground, the public votes in Council recently, and the recent formal vote in the Assembly. I'm very much aware that not all were in favour, but the majority were. Conference, this is not black and white. And you'll hear arguments which will seek to say that one side is right, and the other is wrong. We have to face the reality that there are differing views. Conference, I believe that this is a real test of our ability to respect each other and each other's views. And I hope that you find room within this amendment to allow you to do that. I urge you to support the amendment. Thank you.
Gareth Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I've come to speak at conference on the understanding that I would be proposing the Andersonstown motion, but that is not now the case. But in light of that, I just want to articulate a couple of brief points that have been expressed to me by members of our branch. Should it have come to that, our branch would have also accepted the amendment. And we note that there is significant divergence of views in this position, but also that the position adopted by the MLAs is a view that is substantially in line with the amended motion. My branch also wishes to note that this is indeed a rights-based party, and that the sentiment of equality goes back to the very foundations. And our position on this matter should reflect this. The Andersonstown branch also wishes to note that given the 92 position, as you'll read in the amended motion, we believe that this is a good standard in which to progress this debate. But we want to make it very clear that the position must be entirely consistent with freedom of expression and religion. And that includes no suggestion that the state, should it choose to legislate in this regard, would impose any sanctions on the church and its practices. And the final note, Chair, is just that, of course, the essence of freedom of religion allows churches to define their own definitions and practices in relation to this marriage. So I wish it to be noted that our branch would have accepted this motion also. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to be clear, we're now debating the amended motion, which is the top of page 22. Declan O'Loughlin, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I want to speak against the motion as amended, and I want the conference to give you 5 reasons for doing that. Chair, I don't think that this is fundamentally an equality or a human rights issue. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission says the restriction of marriage to opposite-sex couples does not violate the international standards, and this is clear from both the international treaties and the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights and the United Nations Human Rights Committee. I was taught some philosophy some nearly 40 years ago by Professor Paul Hurst, and it was stressed that equal things must be treated equally. But conference, it's far from a self-evident truth that marriage for a same-sex couple and marriage between a man and a woman are the same thing. Reason number 2, which follows on from that, what I think the debate is actually about. This debate is fundamentally about the social meaning of marriage. Why does the state get involved in marriage in any case? It's because of the social effect of marriage, and particularly about the nurture of children, and what is more important than the nurture of children. In the Assembly debate on the 1st of October, Jim Allister, rightly in my view, challenged Stephen Agnew, who introduced the same-sex marriage proposal. Jim Allister challenged him on the issue of equal rights for a person who wants to be polygamous. I spent 3 years in Kenya, where polygamy was legal and widespread. It's perfectly possible to legalize polygamy. In the debate, Stephen Agnew replied that we have to consider the social effects of polygamy. They would be bad,
so we have to reject the equality claim of a would-be polygamist. That is a vital concession. In considering this matter, we are equally right to invoke the social effect of it. I believe that same-sex marriage is damaging to the traditional concept of marriage and the role of marriage in the bringing up of children. Third reason, we are told that the rights of churches who cannot accept same-sex marriages will be protected, that any protection can be offered to churches if same-sex marriage is introduced. The Church of England is an established church, and any parishioner has a right of marriage in their local Anglican church. If same-sex marriage is legal, before long a same-sex couple will demand to be married in their Anglican church, and they may well succeed in law. Similarly, for other churches, if a marriage is valid legally there, it will be argued that a same-sex couple have an equal right in law to be married there. Reason number 4. Has the SDLP considered its traditional voting base in this matter? And how many have been quietly switched off by the position of the party? There's a recent book by a man called Jonathan Haidt which argues that social liberals and social conservatives do not hear or understand each other, and that they need to better. In particular, liberals do not understand the fears of conservatives that the traditional bases of society are being undermined. He quotes Edmund Burke: "Social order is hard to achieve and easy to lose." I think that's where a lot of our voters are. Reason 5. If I've written this in relation to any of the proposals that were there, the two original proposals on the amendment, remarks would apply to any of them. If any of those had gone through, and in particular now this amendment, that would be party policy. If in future the matter comes up at the Assembly or at a district council, any member dissenting will be in breach of party policy. Do we really want to get into the position of holding disciplinary panels, expelling loyal members, or forcing resignations over this? I don't think any of the proposals put in front of conference today were the right one or created the right stance for this party. And I ask you to reject this amendment.
Thank you, Deborah.
Chair, I want to say at the outset, one of the reasons I joined this party was because I believe we were a party who can treat each other with respect, we can debate issues that are difficult, and we can discuss issues that we have differing views on. And I think that's what this party is. We can respectfully discuss and debate issues that we don't always agree on, and I think that's a good sound basis. Unlike some other parties in this country, I think that's a good sound basis for dealing with this issue and for dealing with any other issue. One of the other reasons that I joined the SDLP was because we're a party founded in equality, in the principle of human and civil rights. I think this issue goes to the core of that, and I think the Assembly Group, when coming to its position, came to its position in recognition of the fact that we had different views in our party. We weren't trying to hide that, we weren't trying to run away from it. We acknowledge it, and we acknowledge the fact that people have different views and different views from myself. And I'm very confident and comfortable to be in a party where I can have a different view from Declan, and that we can have this discussion and move out of this room united together. But I have to take issue with one thing Declan said. Declan says that people would be held to this position. We've made it very, very clear, and I think we need to make it clear again today, that anyone with an issue with this has got a conscience, get out clause, and people have been given that get out clause in councils and in the Assembly, and I think that's a way to go forward. I believe very strongly in the institution of marriage. That's why I got engaged last year, and I think there's still time to get out of it, but I'm told it's a good thing to most people. The reason I believe in this, support this motion, is because I want to see that strong institution extended to people who love each other, regardless of their sexuality, and I think that's a sound basis for going forward. I think this motion is about strengthening the institution of marriage, not diluting it. And I think, just finally, Chair, we need to show my generation that this party is still the party of equality, still the party of civil rights, and still the party who are able to listen, discuss, and deal with difficult issues, regardless of any of our own individual beliefs. Thank you very much.
And then Rosemary Flanagan. Okay.
Ours is a party which rose proudly out of the civil rights movement, as we sought to erase division, discrimination and distrust from our society. When we first embarked on that journey, our priority was, quite rightly, to end the violence that entrenched hatred between our religious and political communities. Today, division still exists on that front, but also on a much broader social plane, and in among that, there is an insidious and saddening division, not basing itself on those who hate each other, but those who love each other. 20 years ago, we defined ourselves as a party that sought full equality for all, including the gay community, and today we have a chance to reaffirm that and not only celebrate equality for our LGBT community, but for all. A UK-wide YouGov poll commissioned this year showed that over 70% of people supported the extension of civil marriage to same-sex couples, and that over 50% of people of faith agreed. We as Social Democrats respect the right of those faith groups that have a traditionalist view of marriage to hold to that view and to celebrate it in their place of worship. But we as Social Democrats must also acknowledge that differing views can live side by side in mutual respect, and thus the time is right to seek an accommodation which celebrates love in all its forms and puts commitment and stable relationships in all their shapes, sizes and forms at the heart of our society. Look to the banner behind me: respect, equality and prosperity for all. We have seen over the troubled history of our island, we cannot hope for prosperity without first entrenching respect and equality. Conference, I ask you to support the Executive's amendment as a mark of faith in our commitment to respect and equality for all, both for those who wish to respect long-held traditions and for those who wish to celebrate the diversity of our deeply felt, loving human relationships. Why should I defend our party on the doorsteps when you can't defend me?
Rosemary Flanagan next, and then after that it will be Justin Cartwright.
I speak against the amendment, motions 37 and 38. Homosexuals and lesbians are members of our families. They are our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters. They are our friends and work colleagues. They are entitled on all levels to be treated with fairness and respect. And it is right that SDLP should support their cause, which it has done in the drive towards the achievement of the Civil Partnership Act in 2004 and the Equality Act in 2010. The Equality Act has given full legal protection to gays in terms of employment opportunities and benefits. The Civil Partnership Act has enabled homosexuals and lesbians to register and enter into a civil partnership, which allows them to have public recognition of their partnership and expression of their love for one another. And in this civil partnership, they also have the same rights as heterosexual couples in relation to a full range of property rights, inheritance tax, social security, pension benefits, tenancy rights, next of kin and rights. In fact, there are just two elements which have not been given to gay couples: the right to call their union a marriage and the right as a couple to adopt children. And therein lies the present crux of this matter. But while the right to marry is a basic right, it is still not a universal right. States give protection to the institution of marriage and regulate it in a number of ways. For example, there's a minimum age requirement of 16 to get married, and relatives closer than second cousins cannot marry. But the main issue here, and the most important issue, is that the claim to the concept of same-sex marriage is not about equality, rights or fairness. It is about changing the legal definition of marriage, presenting a different view of what marriage is and what it's for, breaking the necessary connections with childbearing and connections of kinship. Marriage is not just about sexually intimate companionship. It is a unique yet universal structure, internationally accepted as a social, legal and religious commitment between a man and a woman to live together in a union which generally leads to the procreation of children, the only pairing which can naturally create children. And that pairing creates a network of kinship and social connections which are the essential building blocks of society and which ensure the onward progression of our society. And it is only that current definition of marriage which can harness gender differences for the purposes of social cooperation, bringing together male and female characteristics and bonding them for the good of society, enabling an essential interdependence of men and women within marriage and across society. And there is ample evidence that children need a mother and a father for their secure and stable development. Every child has a moral claim on his or her natural father and mother, grounded in the fact that they brought the child into being. It is good for every child to be brought up with the natural parents, committed in relationship to each other and to the child. The distinctive gender roles of a father and mother are so important in the psychological development of children. And that, of course, is the ideal, and the ideal is not always possible, as we know. But we nevertheless should be aiming for the ideal. And that is what the state should be supporting and resourcing at a time when family life is subject to so many pressures. Traditional marriage, as it is currently defined, secures the equal values of men and women and promotes the welfare of children and the future of society. That is the bottom line. And on that basis, Enniskillen and Branch argues that the institution of marriage is designed for people of opposite gender, and that civil partnership is for couples of the same gender, and still offers respect to everyone in our society.
Thank you, Chair. I rise to speak in favour of the motion as amended. Delegates, I want to talk about heterosexism. It's the attitude where, you know, LGBT people, they're fine, they're our brothers and sisters, but marriage, oh, that's a bit too far, it's not really what it is. What heterosexism is defined as is a system of attitudes, bias and discrimination in favour of opposite sex, sexuality and relationships. And what I want to put to the floor tonight is that heterosexist attitudes are just as damaging to LGBT people in our society as outright homophobia is. Delegates, it's not okay for the state to discriminate. It is never okay for the state to discriminate. We've heard from a couple of previous speakers that churches will somehow be cajoled into performing these same-sex marriages. But what I put to you is there can be adequate legislative support in favour of churches that wish to exercise their own definition of marriage. An example of that is the Catholic Church, who refuse to marry divorcees. That's something that wouldn't happen in a civil marriage because that would be discrimination on the grounds of marital status. And furthermore, I'd just like to say that using a personal religious conviction to argue support for state discrimination fails to acknowledge the separation of church and state, which has been adequately observed by the previous speakers. It's also important to note that these kind of attitudes and the use of these attitudes have had a long history in public suffering and denial of rights in the history of the UK. And only just off the top of my head, for instance, before the religious emancipation in the 1820s and 30s, where the established church uses their deeply held religious convictions to exercise state discrimination against both Catholics and dissenting churches. So just finally, I want to call on the conference floor to reflect this great party's values and rights-based tradition and vote in favour of the motion as amended. Thank you.
Seamus to greet you, and then Alex, okay?
Thank you, Chair. I stand to speak in support of the motion as amended, although I do regret that in the way the motion's amended, the reference to civil partnership has been lost, but I think we all understand that the spirit of that will stand, because I think the proposals that the British government has had in terms of the Westminster Bill were only to provide for same-sex civil marriage. They were not to provide any changes in relation to civil partnerships. So civil partnerships are going to continue to be restricted to same-sex couples, and on the grounds of equality, I think people, whether they're a same-sex couple or a mixed-sex couple, if they choose civil partnership as their form of registering and recognising a relationship, they should be able to do it. If they choose civil marriage as their form of registering and recognising their loving relationship, they should be able to do it. So the equality works both ways in terms of both forms of registration. A number of arguments have been made, the thin end of the wedge argument that this will be used to be imposed on churches, and Declan specifically said that he believed that this would later be used, I think it was his third point, that this would end up being imposed on churches so it would actually be used to alter their concept and their understanding of marriage and their rights. We as a party would never be in the business of interfering in the sacramental privileges of any church. We absolutely protect all religious freedom and the right of churches to conduct their sacraments and their premises according to their affairs. Many years ago, I was Minister of Finance and Personnel, and in that capacity I was the Minister for Law Reform, believe it or not, as well, and also had responsibility for marriage and divorce laws in terms of issues of the whole question of the work of the registrars. And Sean Farn succeeded me in that. I came home one day and told Jackie I had signed divorce papers that day. And it was because I was bringing forward proposals to actually liberalise the conduct and access to divorce proceedings in Northern Ireland where the divorce wasn't actually being contested by either party. It didn't mean that I believed any differently in relation to my own attitude to marriage, or I didn't want my church to change its attitude to marriage or whatever, but I recognised that in terms of the civil law, in terms of civil marriage procedures and what the state has to do, the space that it has to allow the citizens to conduct their lives, it was a sensible change to make. Similarly, I started and then Sean continued, we changed the law in relation to marriage as it affected a number of churches and actually equalised how the law here treats and relates to churches in terms of the conduct of marriage. I know some churches had their doubts about it at the time, but we pointed out to them that similar changes had been made in Scotland and the sky hadn't fallen, and it was sensible, it was with respect for all churches, and it wouldn't undermine churches' value for marriage or how they perceive marriage. Declan also, in relation to, in his contribution, referred, his first point was he quoted the Human Rights Commission in saying that various instruments of international law could not be used and shouldn't be used to force a change in relation to marriage. That's actually the protection that the churches have. Rather than Declan's first point, rather than actually being an argument and justification of the current state discrimination in relation to civil marriage, it was actually an assurance that international legal instruments cannot be used to impose a different definition of marriage on churches, that churches will have the right to their own view in relation to that. The state will respect that, but the state obviously has to make provision for marriage for people who are not accommodated within churches, or who don't belong to churches, or who don't seek to get married in churches for reasons of their own honesty or anything else. So the state has to make that provision, and we have to make that honest provision as well. The fact is, gender equality, which this party has never had any qualms about supporting, gender equality hasn't led to be the thin end of the wedge to impose the ordination of women on churches that don't want to ordain women or anything else. So churches have their own protection, and the protection of churches is something that I would be prepared, and I'm sure my other colleagues would be prepared to affirm in amendments in Westminster. So if people need further assurance that the bill, when it comes forward, isn't going to be used to impose anything in the future in churches, that can happen. The problem about in and around the Church of England, there are issues that need to be faced in relation to the Church of England, but this won't be used to change at that church's notion of sacraments or anything else, but the tensions that are there around an established church are going to have to be addressed in a different way. I don't think the way to accommodate some of the anachronisms that there are with the Church of England is for us to say, well, to respect the sensitivities and the anachronisms of an established church, we have to maintain discrimination in law. This is a choice we have. It's a clear choice we have. It's a principle we can express formally, and we will do that. Those of us who, as members individually, have difficulties with that will be able to dissent accordingly. But we, as a party, should not allow that right of individual dissent on conscience grounds to block the very clear stand that we need to take and be seen to be taking.
Chair of the Youth Group,
Conference. I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Youth Group, the future leaders of this party. We fully support this motion, and as a rights-based party, I urge you to support it too. Thank you.
Soon to put you in an actual wind up.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on this motion as a member of the Policy Committee, and I want to pay tribute to Fergal, our Chairman, and my fellow members of the committee, specifically Rosemary Flanagan and Gareth Brown, for the many hours of work that we have all put in over the past few months to really establish a firm home for our committee. Throughout the entirety of our discussions about this issue, over many weeks and many months, the core principle in our deliberations has been respect. Respect for gay and lesbian couples who seek to cement their relationship in civil marriage, and respect for religious definitions of marriage, which we cannot legislate for. Respect is one of the core values of the SDLP. In fact, it's right there behind it, in big bold print. Throughout our 40-odd years of leadership on this island, we have always put that principle first. The new Ireland we seek to build equates to a coalition of all, cemented in respect and equality, and contrary to the division of the past and the disrespect of all difference. As I said, Chair, our amendment does not seek to legislate for what we cannot. We have honoured this respectful tradition of the separation of church and state. And we have honoured the tradition of religious institutions being able to set their own definitions of marriage, and members of those institutions being able to abide by those definitions. So I would like to refute the claims made by a previous speaker that all members would be bound to support of equal civil marriage. Rather, those who have religious difficulties would be able to differ in their opinion. In the new Ireland brought about by the new phase of politics that Alistair spoke about last night on our televisions, and the new politics that we are discussing this weekend, respect will form the cornerstone of our political system. And in that spirit of respect and equality, I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you, John.
Conference. I think really what I want to do is do what Mark did and respond to some of the points that were made by Declan. Because as is always the case on a Friday evening at a conference, and we go back 20 years, it's very often Declan alone who takes an independent or somewhat different position than might be the wider view. I can remember in this hotel and in many other, there used to be this debate about policing and the divergent views going back 10 and 20 and 30 years, and very often it's Declan who captured a different sense of things, and I think that different sense of things needs a bit of response. The first point is that we in this party do not draw conclusions from what Jim Allister and Stephen Agnew say on the floor of the Assembly. It was the point that Mark made. We are informed by our own judgment, our own values and our own wisdom. And whether Jim Allister got Stephen Agnew on the hop and he tends to do that in the Assembly quite a bit with MLAs. That's their business. We come to our own judgments and our own conclusions based upon our own values and our own principles, a point that Mark made. The second, it is surely stretching a point that in a party that after tea will be discussing how we want to better discipline ourselves, given that we don't discipline ourselves very often, that somehow on the far side of this motion, if it were to be passed, that suddenly people who dissent are going to be the first and only people disciplined. That's not going to be the case. Rather, and this won't be the last time that I quote Robert Kennedy in this conference, what did Robert Kennedy say? That he demanded the right to dissent because there's much to dissent from. That's the character and the history of this party. And it'll be the character and history of this party over the next 30 and 40 years. But the notion that because somebody would dissent on this issue, that the law's arm of the chief whip is somehow going to come and impose their will on him or her, in my view, is stretching a point. The third thing is, if you go and look at the Scottish Nationalist Government's website, when Nicola Sturgeon made her announcement on behalf of the Scottish Government in July that they were going to propose a legislation that is outlined in the amended motion, her statement said very little about civil marriage and said oceans about the protections of religious freedom and religious expression. And so on and so forth for all those legislatures that might take forward this proposal. It will be the real issue, once the principle of civil marriage might be established, is to guarantee the protections. And if Scotland and London and other jurisdictions can guarantee the protections to mitigate the risk that Declan outlined, that people in church communities will be forced to conduct ceremonies in their accommodation, the weight of all that law and all that practice will ensure that the fear that Declan outlined isn't going to arise. And the fourth point that Declan made, and Mark touched on it as well, is that what is the best advice from international law? And I'm not going to repeat what Mark said, because Mark captured it. It is embedded in domestic, national and international code, convention and charters about rights and the right to freedom of expression of religion. And that's not going to be compromised. Whatever people might think about international jurisprudence, it is established as a core value and a core right, and it is not going to be thrown to the wind. So on my own behalf, maybe that's what I would send a note up to Joe Byrne, maybe on behalf of others as well, I thought it was necessary to reply to some of the points that Declan made.
And just the final word in this section now by Fergal, Vice Chair.
Who've taken part in this debate. We all knew from the start that there are differing views on this issue. And those who hold those views dearly are entitled to them and hold them for very, very good reason. And we should respect them, which is what this amendment before you proposes. The other motions which were before you call for legislative protection of churches and to protect people in terms of freedom of speech. And I would like to thank both Mark and Alex for their contributions on those issues. But this motion, if you like, is bespoke. As I indicated earlier, in that it extends that approach to church membership. It calls for respect, not just for the views of the church, but the congregation too. And Declan, your view on a Sunday is the same at council or assembly on a Monday. Conference, if we can call for legislation for churches, then surely we can call for respect for the views of a broad church, which this party represents. Can I remind you that 20 years ago, we were leading the charge in terms of gay rights and urging equal rights for all. You as a conference backed that motion in 1992, and I think it's important to state that again, Chair. This amendment is about updating that position. Conference, I urge your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. It's good to see such a crowd on Friday afternoon. I know that Heather, the worship in her speech, but it was an important debate to have as many speakers as possible. It's now going to be a carrying vote. So all of those who have their green cards and are in favour of the amended motion at the top of page 22, show their hand. Thank you. And now, please, those who are against the amended motion. It's carried, in my opinion, by 3-1. Agreed? Thank you very much. Can I ask everyone to please stay in the hall?